Today I'm sewing and sharing a project from one of my sewing pattern books. This is the Knot Dress by Named Clothing. It's one of the many patterns included in their Breaking the Pattern book, a sewing book with many beautiful women's patterns, dresses, pants, tops, and even a tote bag. It includes excellent instructions and guidance for various techniques. This pattern makes an elevated alternative to a typical t-shirt dress. I've left a link to the pattern book in the description box if you'd like to check it out and sew this project along with me. Cut out your pattern, mark your notches, and let's get started. Starting with our outer front pieces, press these edges of the tips of the tie to the wrong side by 3/8 of an inch, folding in those edges at that subtle corner. And then we're going to roll the hems of the top edge of the tie as well as the bottom edge of this hem, folding it and pressing it again to the wrong side by 3/8 of an inch, and then rolling that over on itself another 3/8 of an inch and pressing that all along the bottom and again this top section of the tie. Notice that at the top of this tie section, you should have a tiny little notch. At this notch where the tie connects to the center front seam, your hem will naturally begin to narrow as it becomes that center front area. So now here I've rolled and pressed the hem all along the bottom and the top section of my tie, and I manipulated the hem seam allowances here so that I get a nice point at the tip of the tie. And now I'm going to go ahead and clip these sections and take it to my sewing machine and sew with either a zigzag stitch, a straight stretch stitch, or your cover stitch machine. And I'm just going to edge stitch close to that inner fold, starting from my outer seam all the way to the tip of the tie and then pivoting my stitching to the end of that tapering where it meets the center front. Once your edges are hemmed, you can take a needle and thread and slip stitch this very corner of the tie on the inside so that it maintains a nice encased point. Repeat all of these steps to finish your tie edges for your other center front piece. The instructions say to finish the edges of these center front seams for our outer front sections, but because I'm working with a jersey here and I'm not worried about it fraying at all, I'm just going to leave it unfinished. I'm going to place both of my outer front pieces right sides together, and I'm going to pin together my center front seam from the neckline all the way to the notch at the beginning of my tie piece. I'm going to sew from the neckline to the top of the tie with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, sewing just past the opening of that tie area by about 3/8 of an inch. Now grab your dress front piece and place your outer front piece on top with the wrong side of your outer piece facing the right side of the front of your dress. And pin your shoulder seams. Now that those seams are nicely aligned and held in place, grab your back piece and place the back piece on top so that the front and back pieces are technically right sides together and you have this outer front piece sandwiched in between. And now pin all of these layers together at the shoulder seams. And now we're going to sew the shoulder seams through all the layers. I'm going to sew them first on my sewing machine using a stretch stitch with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and then we're going to serge afterward. To stabilize the seam at the shoulder seam to prevent stretching over time, you want to serge either stay tape into that seam, or another alternative would be to use clear elastic. I'm just going to use stay tape here per the pattern instructions. I'm going to cut one strip per shoulder seam, cutting it to the length of the shoulder. I'm just going to place it right on top of that seam and take it to my serger and serge this seam, serging the stay tape into those stitches. And do this on both sides. Fold your neckband in half right sides together and clip the short ends. Sew the short ends with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now that you've sewn that seam, notice that you have a notch in the middle of that seam. That notch allows you to split your seam allowance in half to reduce bulk in this area as you sew. Before we press this neckband in half, make sure that one side of the seam allowance is going one way and the other side is going the other way. And then you can fold your neckband wrong sides together, and you can give that a good press to create a crease at the top of this neckband. I've gone ahead and clipped these layers together, the front and the outer front pieces at the neckline, so that they don't shift around on me as I apply the neckband. Now I'm going to apply the neckband to the neckline, starting by matching the notches in my neckband to each shoulder seam, right sides together. And you'll want the seam of your neckband to match with your center back. And also make sure that you're pinning the exact center front of your neckline to the exact center front of your dress. Now that we have the neckband properly distributed around the neckline, we're ready to sew it in place. I'm just going to use my serger for this step, serging with a 3/8 inch seam allowance all around the neckline. Note that you will need to slightly stretch this neckband as you sew to perfectly match it and fit it to the neckline. As you're slightly stretching that neckband, make sure that you're not at all stretching the dress portion of your neckline. Now we're going to get ready to attach our sleeve to each of the armholes. I've opened out my dress so that the front and the back are going out in opposite directions, and the right side of the garment is facing me. I'm going to pin together my front and outer front pieces at the arm side here, just so that they're perfectly aligned for me as I move forward. Now I'll grab my sleeve piece and place it right sides together with the garment, matching the notch at the top of my sleeve to my shoulder seam, and also matching the notches that indicate the front of the garment. Continue pinning in place all around the top of the sleeve. And now you can sew and/or serge this seam with a 3/8 inch seam allowance and do the same thing to apply your other sleeve. Now we're going to place the front and back dress piece right sides together, again sandwiching your outer front piece in between. And we're going to start pinning from the bottom of the sleeve all the way to the bottom of the dress, making sure as you pin to catch this middle layer, the outer front, as you go. Sew and/or serge this side seam with a 3/8 inch seam allowance and do the same thing on the other side seam. The hem allowance for the bottom of the dress is 3/4 of an inch. So press that hem allowance to the inside and using your preferred stretch stitch, stitch all the way around. Hem the bottoms of both of your sleeves in the same way as you did for the bottom of your dress, and you're all done with your dress. Thank you so much for watching this sew along. Make sure you check out my other videos for more great sewing inspiration, and I'll see you in the next video.